Your voice is the bridge between your soul and the world. It carries the weight of your character, the depth of your wisdom, and the strength of your convictions. The ancient Stoics understood something most men today have forgotten. That speech is not just sound escaping your lips, but the very essence of who you are made manifest. When Marcus Aurelius stood before the Roman Senate, when Epictetus addressed his students, when Seneca counseled emperors, they wielded their words like a master craftsman wields his tools, not carelessly, not impulsively, but with precision, purpose, and profound understanding of the power they held. The greatest tragedy of our age is not that men have stopped speaking, but that they have forgotten how to speak in a way that commands respect. We live in an era of endless chatter where every thought is immediately broadcast, every emotion instantly expressed, every opinion hurled into the digital void without consideration or consequence. But the Stoic man knows better. He understands that respect is not demanded, it is earned. It is earned not through volume or aggression, but through the disciplined mastery of one's own voice. Think about the men you respect most, not the loudest voices in the room, not the ones who dominate every conversation, but those who speak with such clarity and purpose that when they open their mouths, the world leans in to listen. These are the men who have learned the ancient art of speaking so that others respect them. They have discovered what the Stoics knew 2,000 years ago, that true power lies not in what you say, but in how you choose to say it. When you choose to say it, and most importantly, when you choose to remain silent. The first lesson of Stoic speech is the mastery of silence before impulse. In our reactive world, the immediate response has become the norm. Someone challenges you and you fire back instantly. Someone insults you and you retaliate without pause. But the Stoic man knows that the space between stimulus and response is where wisdom lives. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations about the importance of examining our thoughts before they become words. He understood that every word we speak is a choice, and that choice reveals the depth of our character. When you feel the urge to speak immediately, to defend yourself, to prove your point, to win the argument, pause. In that pause lies the difference between a man who is respected and a man who is merely heard. The respected man chooses his words like a general chooses his battles. He does not engage in every skirmish, but when he does engage, he does so with such precision and purpose that victory is inevitable. Not victory over others, but victory over his own impulses, his own need to be right, his own ego demanding immediate satisfaction. Consider the power of speaking only when your words improve the silence. This is perhaps the most challenging principle for modern men to embrace. We have been conditioned to fill every silence, to contribute to every conversation, to make our presence known through constant verbal participation. But the Stoic understands that silence is not emptiness, it is potential. Silence is the canvas upon which meaningful words are painted. When you speak only when your words add genuine value, when they contribute something necessary rather than merely something convenient, people begin to listen differently. They begin to anticipate your words rather than tolerate them. Epictetus taught his students that we are not responsible for what happens to us, but we are entirely responsible for how we respond. This principle transforms how we approach every conversation. When someone speaks to you with anger, you do not mirror their anger. When someone approaches you with chaos, you do not reflect their chaos. Instead, you respond from a place of centered calm, from a foundation of inner discipline that no external force can shake. This is not passivity, this is power. This is not weakness, this is strength refined to its purest form. The second pillar of respectful speech is choosing clarity over noise. In a world drowning in information, the man who can distill complex ideas into simple truths becomes invaluable. The Stoics were masters of this art. Their philosophy, dealing with the deepest questions of human existence, was expressed in language so clear that a slave could understand it and an emperor could apply it. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, wrote letters to his friend Lucilius that read like conversations between equals. He did not hide behind complicated language or intellectual posturing. He spoke the truth plainly, powerfully, and with undeniable clarity. When you speak, ask yourself, am I adding clarity or creating confusion? Am I illuminating or obscuring? Am I serving the truth or serving my ego? The man who chooses clarity over cleverness, substance over style, meaning over mere sound, finds that his words carry weight far beyond their volume. People respect clarity because it shows respect for their time, their intelligence, and their ability to understand when truth is spoken plainly. Logic over emotion becomes the third foundation of respected speech. This does not mean becoming emotionally cold or disconnected from human feeling. Rather, it means understanding that emotions are information, not instruction. They tell us what we are experiencing, but they should not dictate how we respond. When you speak from a place of emotional reactivity, you give others power over your words. Your responses become predictable. Your arguments become personal. Your credibility becomes questionable. The Stoic man feels deeply, but speaks from logic, processes his emotions privately, and expresses his thoughts publicly only after they have been refined through the filter of reason. This creates a presence that others find both compelling and trustworthy. People know that when you speak, you are not speaking from a place of momentary feeling, but from a place of considered thought. This reliability becomes the foundation of respect. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. This wisdom applies directly to how we speak about our challenges, our fears, and our circumstances. The man who constantly speaks of his problems, who vocalizes every concern, who shares every worry, gradually trains others to see him as someone who is overwhelmed by life rather than someone who is mastering it. This does not mean hiding genuine struggles or pretending perfection. It means choosing to speak about difficulties from a place of solution-seeking rather than problem-welling. Restraint over reaction marks the fourth principle of powerful speech. The ability to remain calm when others are agitated, to speak softly when others are shouting, to choose measured words when others are speaking recklessly, creates a magnetic presence that draws people toward you rather than away from you. This restraint is not suppression, it is strength. It is the strength of a man who is so secure in his own identity that he does not need to prove himself through aggressive or defensive communication. When someone attempts to provoke you, your restraint becomes your power. To drag you into an argument, your calm becomes your authority. When someone speaks to you with disrespect, your measured response becomes your dignity. This is not about being passive or weak. This is about being so strong that you can choose your response rather than being forced into a reaction. The fifth element of respected speech: speaking less, but with more depth. Quantity of words does not equal quality of communication. Man who speaks constantly may be heard, but he is rarely listened to. The man who chooses his words carefully, who speaks only when he has something meaningful to contribute, who values the weight of his words over the frequency of his speaking, creates anticipation around his communication. People begin to lean in when he speaks because they know that when he opens his mouth, something worth hearing will emerge. This principle requires developing a relationship with silence that most men find uncomfortable. We have been taught to fill every pause, to respond to every statement, to contribute to every conversation. But the Stoic man understands that silence is not empty space to be filled, but fertile ground from which meaningful words can grow. He becomes comfortable with pauses, with moments of reflection, with the space between thoughts. This comfort with silence creates a presence that others find both mysterious and magnetic, letting presence and tone carry. Weight represents the sixth pillar of powerful communication. Your voice is an instrument, and like any instrument, it must be mastered to create beautiful music. The Stoics understood that how you say something is often more important than what you say. A simple truth spoken with conviction carries more power than a complex argument delivered with uncertainty. Your tone reveals your inner state, your confidence, your respect for yourself and others. The man who has mastered his inner world speaks with a tone that reflects that mastery. His voice carries the weight of his character, the depth of his wisdom, the strength of his convictions. He does not need to raise his voice to be heard because his presence commands attention. He does. not need to speak loudly because his words resonate with the truth of his being. This is not about developing a particular vocal style, but about aligning your inner state with your outer expression, using pauses for power. Becomes the seventh principle of masterful communication. The pause is the punctuation of speech, the space that gives meaning to words, the silence that makes sound significant. Most men fear pauses because they interpret them as weakness or uncertainty. But the Stoic man uses pauses as tools of emphasis, moments of reflection, spaces for others to absorb the weight of his words. A well-timed pause can be more powerful than a perfectly crafted sentence. When you pause before answering a question, you demonstrate thoughtfulness. When you pause after making a point, you allow its weight to settle. When you pause in the middle of a difficult conversation, you create space for wisdom to emerge. These pauses are not empty moments. They are pregnant with possibility. Show that you are not rushing to fill air with sound, but carefully crafting communication that serves a purpose. Detaching from the need to impress marks the eighth cornerstone of respected speech. The man who speaks to impress others speaks from a place of insecurity. He needs external validation to feel internally complete. But the Stoic man speaks from a place of inner fullness. He has no need to prove his intelligence, his worth, or his value through his words. His freedom from the need to impress creates a naturalness in communication that others find refreshing and authentic. When you speak without the need to impress, you speak from truth rather than strategy. Your words become genuine expressions of your thoughts rather than calculated attempts to create a particular impression. This authenticity becomes magnetic because it is so rare. People are drawn to genuine communication because it offers them permission to be genuine themselves. The ninth principle teaches us to speak from our center, not from our circumstances. The Stoic man understands that his words should reflect his character, not his current situation. Whether he is experiencing success or failure, praise or criticism, abundance or scarcity, his communication remains consistent with his values and principles. This consistency creates trustworthiness, because others know that his words are anchored in something deeper than momentary experience. When you speak from your center, you speak with authority that comes not from position or power, but from alignment with your deepest values. Your words carry the weight of your character, the strength of your convictions, the depth of your wisdom. People respect this consistency because it shows that you are not at the mercy of external circumstances, but are guided by internal principles. Understanding that respect is earned through consistency, not charisma, forms the 10th element of powerful communication. Charisma can attract attention, but only consistency builds respect. The man who speaks with wisdom today, but foolishness tomorrow, who communicates with strength in public, but weakness in private, who presents himself as one thing in one context and another thing in another context, gradually erodes the respect others have for him. The Stoic man builds respect through the consistent alignment of his words with his actions, his private thoughts with his public statements, his values with his vocabulary. This consistency requires tremendous self-discipline because it means you cannot say whatever is convenient in the moment, but must speak from a place of integrated truth. This integration becomes the foundation of genuine respect. The 11th principle emphasizes speaking to serve truth, not to win arguments. The man who enters every conversation with the goal of proving himself right makes every interaction a battle. But the Stoic man enters conversations with the goal of discovering truth, sharing wisdom, and contributing to understanding. This shift in intention completely transforms the dynamic of communication. When you speak to serve truth rather than to serve your ego, you become genuinely interested in what others have to say. You listen not just to formulate your response, but to understand their perspective. You ask questions not to trap them in contradictions, but to explore ideas together. This approach creates conversations that others find valuable and enriching, which naturally leads to respect. The 12th element teaches us to speak with the weight of our convictions behind our words. The Stoic man does not speak lightly about things he believes deeply. When he expresses his values, his principles, his understanding of truth, he does so with the full weight of his being. This does not mean being rigid or closed to new ideas, but it means that when you speak about what matters most to you, you speak with the authority of someone who has thought deeply, lived fully, and chosen deliberately. This conviction creates a gravity in your words that others feel even when they disagree with your position. They may not share your perspective, but they respect the depth from which it comes. They may not accept your conclusions, but they honor the journey that led you to them. This respect for the depth of your conviction becomes respect for you as a person. The 13th principle involves understanding that silence can be your strongest statement. The Stoic man knows that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. When others are engaged in petty arguments, your silence speaks volumes. When others are gossiping or speaking negatively about someone, your refusal to participate communicates your character. When others are trying to provoke you into a reaction, your calm silence demonstrates your mastery over your own responses. This strategic use of silence requires great inner strength because it means resisting the urge to defend yourself, to correct others, to assert your position. But it also demonstrates a confidence that does not need external validation. People respect the man who is secure enough in himself that he does not need to respond to every provocation, address every criticism, or participate in every conversation. The 14th element teaches us to speak with the understanding that our words create our reality. The Stoic philosophers understood that the language we use shapes not only how others perceive us, but how we perceive ourselves. When you consistently speak from a place of strength, wisdom, and purpose, you reinforce these qualities within yourself. When you speak from a place of weakness, confusion, or reactivity, you strengthen these patterns in your life. This understanding makes every word choice significant. Begin to see your speech not just as communication with others, but as communication with yourself. You recognize that every time you speak, you are either building the man you want to become or reinforcing the man you are trying to leave behind. This awareness creates a gravity and intentionality in your communication that others find compelling. The 15th principle emphasizes speaking with the humility to admit when you do not know something. The Stoic man understands that true wisdom includes the recognition of the limits of his knowledge. When you speak with the confidence to say, "I don't know," when you genuinely don't know, you demonstrate a strength that many men lack. This honesty creates trust because others know that when you do claim knowledge, you actually possess it. This humility in speech requires overcoming the masculine tendency to always have an answer, to always appear competent, to never admit uncertainty. But the Stoic man recognizes that pretending to know what you don't know is a weakness, not a strength. It shows that you are more concerned with appearing intelligent than with being truthful. People respect the man who is secure enough to admit the limits of his knowledge. The 16th element involves speaking with the patience to let others finish their thoughts before you respond. In our age of constant interruption, the man who can listen completely to what others are saying before he speaks demonstrates a rare form of respect. This patience shows that you value the other person's perspective enough to hear it fully, even when you disagree with it. This patience requires disciplining your mind to stay present with the speaker rather than formulating your response while they are still talking. It means being genuinely curious about their perspective rather than simply waiting for your turn to speak. This quality of listening creates conversations that others find valuable and enriching, which naturally leads to respect for you as a communicator. The 17th and final principle teaches us to speak with the understanding that every standing is an opportunity to practice virtue. The Stoic man does not see communication as something separate from his philosophical practice, but as an integral part of his development as a human being. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to practice patience, wisdom, courage, and justice. Through his words, his perspective transforms even difficult conversations into opportunities for growth. When someone speaks to you with anger, you practice patience. When someone shares their struggles with you, you practice compassion. Someone challenges your ideas, you practice intellectual humility. When someone needs guidance, you practice wisdom. This approach makes every conversation meaningful because it serves not just the immediate purpose of communication, but the larger purpose of character development. The Stoic man who masters these principles finds that respect follows naturally, not because he demands it, but because he earns it through the consistent demonstration of character through his words. He speaks not to impress others, but to serve truth. He communicates not to win arguments, but to contribute to understanding. He uses his voice not to dominate conversations, but to elevate them. This mastery does not happen overnight. It requires the same patience, practice, and dedication that any craft requires. But the man who commits to developing this skill finds that it transforms not just how others perceive him, but how he perceives himself. He begins to see himself as someone whose words have weight, whose opinions have value, whose communication has purpose. The ancient Stoics understood that mastering your speech is not about learning clever techniques or persuasive strategies. It is about developing the character that makes your words worth listening to. When you speak from a place of genuine wisdom, authentic strength, and integrated virtue, people listen not because they have to, but because they want to. They respect not just your words, but the man behind the words. In a world filled with noise, the man who has learned to speak with purpose stands out like a beacon in the darkness. He does not need to shout to be heard because his words carry the weight of his character. He does not need to argue to be respected because his communication demonstrates his worth. He does not need to impress to be valued because his authenticity creates its own magnetism. This is the path of the Stoic man, to master his speech, not for the applause of others, but for the peace of his own soul. To speak with such integrity that his words and his character are indistinguishable. To communicate with such wisdom that others seek his counsel. To express himself with such authenticity that his very presence becomes a gift to those around him. The journey begins with a single word spoken with intention. It continues with a moment of silence chosen with wisdom. It develops through countless conversations approached with virtue, and it culminates in the mastery of the most powerful tool a man possesses, his voice, disciplined by his character, guided by his principles, and offered in service to truth. Learn to speak so that people respect you, not because you demand their respect, but because you have earned it through the consistent demonstration of who you are at your deepest level. This is the way of the Stoic, the path of the wise and I. The journey of the man who understands that true power lies not in the volume of his voice, but in the depth of his character.